Thank you all for coming this morning. We really appreciate your effort in coming out, especially on a cold Saturday morning. And I also appreciate the fact that we have some committee members with us. That was very nice of you to attend as well. You're already putting a lot of time and energy into this building and this room since last September, so I do appreciate that. Why don't we get started? Back in February 27th, town did vote for it and request that the property be purchased. There were two propositions, one for the 207 acres, which came to $3.39 million, and the 5.7 acres for the $260,000. The town paid $260,000 for the Clark Road property, the 1960 Clark Road property, which basically encompasses the Clark House, the barn, and the cart house. And they did that separate of the bond itself. The bond is in the process of being finalized. There's a bond anticipation note that's been in place now since August of last year. That'll be finalized this year. And then the bonding process commences for the next 30 years. April 30th was the date that we did close on the property. Anybody can go into the Monroe County Clerk's office and pull up a copy of the deeds if you need to do that. You can certainly call us and we can give those to you as well if you'd like. The properties, there are 4 properties involved in the purchase. The first one was 2701 Atlantic Avenue, which is comprised of 53.1 acres. That property is the property that you see along Atlantic Avenue with the pine trees, and that comes down south till you get to 1950. 1950 Clark Road is approximately 105.3 acres. That is the property north of the Clark House, and then actually to the south of the Clark House, beyond the 5.7 acres where the barn is. And then 1960 Clark Road is the cart house, the Clark House, and the barn. And then finally, 745 Wayland Road is comprised of 47.6 acres. That's the property along Wayland Road as you approach the Church of the Incarnation to the east. There's a work facility on that property. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. Let's go ahead. We showed you a photo of the properties. It's not easy to see here, but the red outlines identify each of the property boundaries. So you can see it wasn't just one property involved, but several. We thought we'd give you a little bit of a history lesson. Many of you probably weren't here in 1970, although I'm looking in the room and I see a lot of friends who were here in 1970. And that's good. That's very good. It's kind of fun to see. I kind of remember it in the late 70s, starting in the late 70s. But you can see that back in the day, it was basically farmland. There was very little tree area on the what used to be called the back nine or the front nine, and that was kind of interesting to see. Also, the size of the quarry as it was in 1970. 1980 continued on as farmland. You can see to the north by Atlantic Avenue, there were 2 baseball diamonds. I used to remember watching softball games there. Dolomite had the property, and you can see that, again, still being utilized for agricultural purposes. A little more tree growth on that property in 1980 than there was in 1970. 1999, we jumped ahead because not much happened after 1980 other than the fact that the golf course was developed. In 1999, the golf course was in full swing. It shows the outline of the holes all throughout the property. And you can see there was a lot of tree loss on that property, particularly on the north part of the property on the front 9 along Scribner Road. That was taken out and then replanted to accommodate the holes. And then again in 2009, we just had a color aerial, so I thought we'd throw that in for you. 2009, I think it was probably in its prime at that point in time, very popular. And then in 2015, this was the last year that it was open. It was the last season for Shadow Pines. And then in 2018, this is where it's kind of growing back to a natural state and continues to do so. I threw that sign in just because I want you to remember that tree when we go later on into the program. Remember the tree. All right.
Do you want me to jump in and start going through some of the buildings?
Yeah, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so thanks to PCTV, we got some great aerial footage. I thought this was a nice picture, kind of showed the building itself. We'll run through the buildings that are out there, the structures. It's been several years since many of you have been inside the buildings, so we've got some pictures inside and do a little walkthrough. So the Clark House, 1960 Clark Road, was built in 1832, approximately 5,000 square feet, lower floor area. The 1832 obviously was the front part of the building. There's been several add-ons. They added on the back and then the pro shop later on, and we'll go through those. This kind of shows it from the other side of the building. You can see the outdoor patio area that was added. So this is the original part of the house, and then you can see the back area. This is where the pro shop was with the exterior patio. Another aerial image, this is looking straight down on the property. So you can see the Clark House itself, the parking lot that comes in, the parking lot in the front, and then the larger parking lot behind it. You've got the cart barn here on the property, and then the outdoor patio areas. So this is going inside the building. This is the former pro shop area. So if you've ever gone in and had golfed, this is kind of to the back. This is the western part of the building. Let me get my laser pointer right. So this is this portion of the building. So you enter from the back. That pro shop was kind of on the back right side. As we go through the pictures, you'll see much of the stuff is still in there. They took out what they wanted and the stuff that they needed. There's still chairs in the building. There's still tables and everything else. So it's a little, I don't want to say creepy, but it's just kind of a pause in time that a lot of the stuff is still there. You walk inside and a lot of the stuff is still set up, going through it. But you can see the pro shop area. They've still got lights on the sides there. The stuff looks like it's kind of ready to go. Going inside the building, this was the main bar area. So these are the rear doors you enter from the back. Obviously, you've still got the portraits and the renderings that are still around on the outsides of the walls. Going towards the front of the old house portion of it. This is the front door here. You've got one dining room on the left, another dining room on the right. We'll look at those in a second. So this is the right side of the house. As you go, this is the frontmost room, and on the corner, a fireplace here. Obviously, wainscoting and the trim around the outside. Still has all the lights on the walls and wallpaper and everything else. So not a whole lot has changed from that.
No, the inside is actually still in very good shape. They maintained it very well during the period of time that it was vacant. They kept the heat on and they kept the water drained, so it is in pretty good shape.
So this is the dining room on the east side of the house, so opposite of where we were just looking, opposite of the main staircase, and then looking back towards the bar area behind, and then the kitchen is in the distance. This is the stairwell leading to the second floor. This is the access door. Actually, it goes down to the basement. You can go down to the basement in the old part of the house. It actually has very low roof lines, ductwork and stuff there, but obviously the original, hand-dug foundation with cobblestone foundation wall still is part of all of that. This is the open portion, so we're standing kind of in the bar area here looking up. As you may recall, it was open and had the railings around the outside, so either you could look down from the top or you can look up, as part of that. Up on the second floor, again, this is a little dark to see, but you can still see the chairs, the tables are still there, the booths are still in their place. So this is on the west side of the building, and that corner piece on the front. Again, a little dark, but on the west side, the east side of the building is the dining room area again. Tables, chairs still in place, still all the curtains on the windows. Now we come into the kitchen. Most of the kitchen stuff is still there. Can't say it's in the best shape right now. Some of the stuff is been relocated out of it. Obviously, we'd need some work and some TLC to get this back, in functioning condition. You can see they left. There's still stacks of stuff that's there, empty boxes that were left behind, trays for glasses, dishes that were used. But as Jim said, the heat was still on, and they kept it in good condition. So it thankfully wasn't.
Boxes were empty when we went over there and took the pictures. We did not touch the boxes. Remember, don't touch anything.
So now we're going to skip over to the cart house. This is the building that was behind it. This was built in 1994, so a little bit later on. This was an addition just for golf. So this is the front that faces towards the Clark house. This is kind of looking down the side of that cart building. Look inside the building. It's just an open concrete floor building with wood truss ceiling. Just an open space. They would park the carts here at night. charge them up for the next day. So it's just kind of an open, empty space. We've got some stuff in there temporarily right now, but obviously, and we'll talk about the RFP later on, right. Dependent upon, who the successful person is for the RFP, this is part of it. So if they take the Clark House, they can also have the cart house and the barn across the street if they so desire.
Before we leave that, before you get into the other, it's important to know that the Clark House, as you all know, is an historic site. It's a local site. It's not a national landmark, but it is a local landmark. When that was approved, the cart barn wasn't there at that point in time. So the cart barn is actually not a part of the designation for the historic site. So just the actual Clark House itself is part of the historic site.
So this is the barn across the street. It was built early 1900s. I was thrown off a little bit when we went out there because this side of the building actually is a concrete block wall, but must have been a repair that was done at some point in time, because you go back over here and you can see a fieldstone foundation wall on that. We have some pictures from inside. Again, they're dark. There's no lighting in there. The outside of the building, needs a bit of work. The inside of the building needs a lot of work. Especially as we look at, or whatever the use is going forward, we'd have to look at, ADA compliance, building code things. If it was decided to, reutilize that building, would need a lot of work for that. At the end, it was used just for the driving range. They'd sell golf balls out of there, and had the pro shop, kind of did some stuff for the driving range and the chipping area over here. You can see the old siding on it. It's got a little weather and wear to the side of the barn. As you look at the building, we do have a broken window or two on the side. There's a garage door here that gets you down underneath the building. There is still some equipment that's down there with it. Here you can see better that fieldstone foundation next to that block foundation. So there has been some repairs or updates to that building as it's gone along. This is looking inside the building. You can see as much as the outdoors as you can at the indoors. It's part of what would need to be some significant restoration if it was to be saved. The posts look and the beams look to be in good condition, but obviously the exterior needs some work with that. Again, you kind of look into the other side. It's a little hard to see without the light. There is a second level, so this is kind of a deck area. There's stairs that go up the second level. It didn't appear that was being utilized. Obviously, it was part of the original barn structure. It didn't appear that was being utilized other than for some storage by the golf course. They had a few chairs up there, but it didn't look like they were using that on a day-to-day basis. So this is the maintenance building. You got to go down Wayland Road. So across from Dolomite's property is the maintenance building. There's two sections to this building. This piece was prior to 1950. We kind of go back in our records and looking at some of the aerial photos for it. This building existed there. This portion is an add-on on this end here. So currently the Penfield players have some of their equipment and things stored in this half of it. This portion of it, I know DPW's talked about, temporarily storing some things there. We don't really have a great plan for this building yet, but obviously as we continue through this process, figure out what that'll be utilized for and where we go from here. About trails.
Just jumping back now to the actual property itself, some of the kind of interesting things to note. We have been working with the Trails Committee and also our Land Use Committee for Shadow Pines. We did a walk, and you'll see somewhere later on in the program, but there are several path areas that were the golf cart paths that were installed years ago. There are currently on the north side or the front nine, there's approximately 12,000 feet of path area, or 2.25 miles. On the south side, on the back nine, there's 9,500 linear feet and 1.8 plus or minus miles, totaling 21,500 feet, or 4.1 miles of walking area that have already been installed on the site for future use. And it was important to note that during the negotiation process, Dolomite was adamant about creating a buffer along the street. There's a 200-foot buffer requirement that was put in place as part of the deed to ensure that the only thing that could be utilized for that 200 feet was driveway access and hiking trails. All existing buildings are not applicable to that requirement because obviously the Clark House is well within that 200-foot area, as is the barn across the street. So there is that buffer area that has to be maintained. It can't have anything, can't even put parking areas in it. It's got to be a driveway or walking paths.
It may be hard to see from the back, but you can kind of see in the red highlighted is that kind of 200-foot swath that covers the road frontages along these two sides there.
Okay, so we have a Shadow Pines Land Use Advisory Committee. Some of the members are here today. If you could raise your hand, I'd appreciate it. Really appreciate you coming out. They've been working diligently since the town board on July 18th created the committee and charged it to make recommendations to the board as to the most appropriate uses for the properties. The committee is comprised of 12 members and has been working on recommendations since September 18th of last year and had a public informational meeting on November 13th to seek public input, which was very valuable to the committee. We had a lot of people come in and talk about various things. We'll show you what they talked about in a minute. The town has received written comments besides the public information meeting, and the town set up a web page. I have to thank Dave Renner and Brian Delameter, who are basically doing all the work here for us today and have been instrumental in giving us a lot of the photos and materials we're using. They have set up a web page, and you can follow the committee's progress if you want to by going onto our site. So here was the purpose of the committee and the charge. The committee, as we said earlier, was to review all options for the property, report findings and prioritized recommendations to the town board. And the charge was to study and issue the written report to the following attributes of the property to identify the land use opportunities and options, land use constraints, community suggestions for use, and what the community may not want to see for the property. Findings for each possible use include a description of use, how the use would be supported, how the use would be funded, and how use would be implemented, opportunities and constraints, and it only applied to the actual 4 properties that we talked about. These were some of the recommendations that came in at the public informational meeting in November. In addition, some of them were submitted to us via email and written comment. The committee has been wrestling through these now for the last month or so, identifying what it feels is appropriate, what it feels is not inappropriate for the site. And we've just kind of gone through the last portion of that the other night. And the next step will be now to sit down and start identifying what those uses will be as a final recommendation to the town board.
And I say the committee's already met. They've gone through each and every item that was suggested, gone through each of those, and they're actually scheduling to bring in some outside groups that made suggestions or wanted some things. So they've asked for some additional information, want to meet with those groups and kind of see what their thoughts are and get a little bit more input before they make a decision on moving ahead with their recommendations.
We took our tours of the property back in October. I believe it was on the 16th and 20th of October. We had visitors who were interested in the property. We had various board members, planning board members, historic preservation board members attend it with us. Very informative walk for a lot of people who had never been on the property or that portion of the property. So what happens next, as we said a minute ago, the committee is going to submit their recommendations to the board by the end of March. The board will accept those recommendations and determine their viability. The board may seek outside consultants to master plan and the placement of viable recommendations on the properties and seek funding mechanisms to implement the recommendations as we can. And as we talked about earlier, there is a request for proposals. The town board did direct the development of a request for proposals to seek interested parties in the use of the Clark House and its ancillary structures. The RFP is near completion, and the town board is expected to authorize its release in late February, early March. We will be interested to see who is interested in the properties. We are requiring that the Clark House itself must be the first one to be utilized or accepted for utilization. We're not going to let the ancillary structures be utilized first and then have to be a burden onto the Clark House for one reason or another. We will be conducting site tours of the buildings themselves for interested parties. You're going to have to set up an appointment and demonstrate that you're really interested in the site and you're not just going to be somebody that wants to walk through just on a Sunday afternoon or something of that nature. So, because I know everybody will. But in any event, we will verify who's actually truly interested, and we will set up appointments to have them walk through the 3 buildings. Why did the town restrict access to the properties for a period of time? It's kind of obvious. A couple things happened. Number one, safety is the number one issue. And we're going to show you some things in a minute as to why. The second thing was there was some vandalism occurring on the property from the time that it closed down to the time that we actually purchased it. Some of those are missing. And we found a couple, and then we've got them for posterity, but some of them were taken. Some of them were actually placed in adjacent yards next to the golf course.
What are you referring to?
The hole markers?
I'm sorry,
So they have like a granite hole marker, so
Yeah.
it shows for each one, whether some people took them as souvenirs or something for their own
and I
posterity.
got to say, they're pretty heavy, so if you were able to take one. So they did close the property down for a period of time to give us an opportunity to, number one, assess the situation in terms of vandalism. And later on, I'm going to show you some stuff where people have actually been dumping on the site that live around the property, and we're trying to put an end to that. You can go on if you want. The big issue, though, is the trees. We've had a lot of trees on that property that everybody thought were beautiful trees, and they were, but they're dead. And they don't look dead when you're looking at them. And I told you earlier to remember that one by the sign out by the road at Shadow Pines. This is one that came down over by Shadow Pines. You can see how bad it is on the inside. We're kind of surprised that these trees did not fall on the Clark house. You see some of these, there's a lot of these out there at 45-degree angles just waiting to fall. Not only are they a problem, but they're also creating a problem for a lot of the trees that are healthy and that they're starting to take them down as part of the process. We did open those properties up back in October. It was the front 9. And then we felt safe enough to open up the back 9 on February 1st. It was kind of nice because when we had the big snowstorm there a couple weeks ago, I happened to drive by just to see if anybody was out, and there were a lot of people doing a lot of cross-country skiing out there, which was really nice to see that happening. Here is by the Clark house. There's a lot of damage coming into these properties around the Clark house itself, so we're watching that. Again, it looks safe, but you've got things overhanging these path areas which are dangerous. This is actually dumping by a neighbor onto our land there. The tree obviously is ours, but the materials by it are not ours, and that's been happening a lot around the property. All right, the famous tree that I told you to remember, this is it. There was nothing to the inside of that tree, and if we'd had another windstorm like we had last night, I have a feeling that we might have been pulling that off the top of the Clark house. So our next steps for the committee, the committee's going to make its recommendations to the town board. The RFP for the Clark house and its ancillary structures will be released in March latest. Respondents will be interviewed to make a determination for the final users. The bonding process will be completed in April. The DPW is finalizing its tree removal along Whalen Road after the plowing season and removal of fallen trees on property, as I showed you a minute ago. There are no, according to the DPW director, there are no trees that have to be cut on the interior of the property. The only trees that are left are the dead ones laying across the frontage of Whalen Road as you approach the Church of the Incarnation from the west heading east. Some of those are going to be coming out, but there are no other ones intended to be taken out of the lands that we talked about. And then we're going to start looking at the idea of identifying funding opportunities to implement the committee's recommendations. They'll probably be short-term, mid-term, and long-term, depending on what is offered as a final recommendation. And we've got one last thing to show you here.
So this was flown just the other day, so it kind of shows some of the existing conditions. It's only been a few years, but it's amazing to see how quickly nature's taken back over. From what you know is a manicured golf course, and having even the sand traps in the greens disappear quite quickly. You can see some sand traps as they've kind of used to be are disappearing quite quickly, and what nature's done. You've got pond areas with that, but these are kind of flying down the fairways. You can see the paths cutting between the holes that are still out there. This is that maintenance shop building that they used. It's got a little enclosed area on the outside.
That property will not, that building will not be part of the RFP. That is probably going to remain town town storage or something of that nature. Believe it or not, it's actually nicer. We saw some video of the summer when the leaves were on the trees. This is actually kind of more revealing because you can't see a lot because there's so much vegetation out there.
Was
during
that
the
a
summer.
creek?
Yes, that's the creek on the back 9. So as you go down between 13 and 14, the creek cuts through the property. This is 14th hole here. What was the 14th hole, and then the green. Yep.
Brook, yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yep. Yeah, you can see the topography as you get into the back 9 of the rolling areas.
Good question either.
And then even you get into, more the steep slope area that the golf course never went on. So there's more property to the west. You can see off the left side if my laser pointer dies.
And we can walk that right now?
You can.
Yes, the back 9 is now open.
Oh,
Yes, it just opened beginning of
1st.
February 1st. So we're flying back. This is the barn that's out there. This is where the driving range used to be. So this is the driving range. You would tee off over here and then kind of drive back, towards where we're standing. But the back 9, if you haven't ever been on it, it's got a lot more topography. You get on the back side. There's a beautiful creek running through it. Bridge over the creek. A lot more, trees on the back 9. The front 9's, a little bit flatter.
It's actually a beautiful walk back there. If you get an opportunity, please take it.
Yeah, there's actually a loop if you leave right by where the old white barn is, go down the right side of that, and then you can kind of go down that path, either make a left or a right. It's a nice loop that kind of goes all the way down. It's got some elevation, so depending on if the day's icy, you go down that 14th hole, it's a little bit steep, but on a drier day or, it's a nice loop around, all asphalt path all the way through. You can loop back around and end up right back by the white barn.
Are you planning to plant trees or reforest any areas, perhaps that were cleared
I think
out
that
for
as we
golf
move forward with the master planning of the area, we'll probably look at landscaping certain portions of it. We're trying to make sure that we don't create situations where it becomes a hazardous issue for the public. So yeah, we'll be looking at part of that as part of the process.
On that same note, when you go about to do that, start a program of people in Penfield donating trees in memory of somebody or some historian. Don't just let the town buy them.
No, that's fine. I think anytime anybody's willing to give the town something, it's a good thing. And, I think that's an excellent idea. And I think there's a lot of people that want to do some things out there to make it a better operation than what it is now. Yes?
I just wanted to piggyback on that because we live right on Colonial Drive, and we were worried about those trees blocked a lot of dust that flies through the air from the quarry. And I had a question about replanting because we get an exceptional amount of dust as it is now, and with all those trees down, it's gonna.
Well, I can't guarantee that they're going to be planting trees along the right-of-way. They may be doing some things interior-wise to try and, a lot of those trees that were out there were there because of the golf course layout.
Okay.
There was a rhyme and a reason as to why they were put where they were. There's no rhyme or reason as to why they have to be in point A versus point B at this point in time. But I would suspect that as time goes on, and as you noted, people might want to donate trees. They might want to donate vegetation of some type. We're trying to keep as much off the right-of-ways as possible, particularly what we went through the last couple of marches. We spent an awful lot of time taking trees out of right-of-ways, taking trees out of power lines, that type of thing, that are running along the right-of-ways. So we're trying to move things back and keep them away from the driving lanes.
No? Okay.
But I think that's an excellent idea, Jenny.
Depends what you want to do.
Did you have a
Fly
question,
through
Dick?
instead. It's on there.
Dick?
Dick, do you have a question?
Yep.
Let's close this out.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Big crowd here. I just want to say one thing which I've said before to Mr. Costello and Valentine and Tony and some of the town board. But I lived 57 years. This was my backyard, and it still is. And it's just a wonderful opportunity that the town of Penfield has. I don't think too many towns get an opportunity like this to develop over 200 acres. But I would like to add Part C to this. Part A is the Clark House on Wayland, and Part B is south of there, on the back 9. And then Part C, which nobody has talked about, except there was a little note here saying that this project did not include the quarry. Well, I've been living with the quarry for too long. And I think the town of Penfield has been living with the quarry too long. And I just think that the next big project should be to do something with the quarry. And I think that Part C, which would be the quarry, would be a beautiful addition across the street from Part A and B. And so I just encourage all you young planners and you young people with money and thoughts will do this part, get this done. It might take 20 years. It probably will, and a lot of thought and effort. But if eventually we could pick up Part C, the quarry, I'll come down from heaven and I'll make another walk down in the quarry. Thank you for listening to me.
Yes.
Do we want to do the fly through first?
When
Jim?
I was at the November meeting, they did indicate then that it would not be, the area would not be open to cross-country skiing, but you said you were encouraged to see people.
No, it is open to cross-country.
It is?
skiing.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, it certainly is. And it was being well enjoyed the other day when I saw probably about 15 people out there. Terry?
Yeah, isn't it being trails, aren't there trails being cut in for cross-country skiing, or is that?
The high school ski team actually grooms trails on the property. They did that a while back when we had the weather. Obviously, it's all weather dependent and may not happen for a while again. Yes?
I'd like to piggyback on what that gentleman just said, too, and that for those that don't know it, when that quarry ceases operations, it's going to fill with water within a matter of, what, a month or something like that?
Oh, no. It's going to take up a couple of years for that to fill up, but it won't. It probably will not fill up all the way. Most quarries are about halfway to 2/3.
What I understand is that it may be over 100 feet deep, but it'll be a very large lake, up to 100 acres is what I've seen in the reclamation plans in the past. It would be and the reclamation plan from the Odenbachs back in the Old Castle Dolomite days suggested that all of this would be for recreational purposes for the town, and it's in the reclamation plan describing it as a recreational area for the town that would be right across from Shadow Pines. So I agree with that gentleman that we really need to consider that, and I've raised this in town board meetings that I have been concerned that that was taken off the table for the discussions for the Shadow Pines Land Use Committee.
Well, you got to understand that quarry is still going to be active for 30 years.
Yeah.
It's going to be a 30-year program there. They probably won't be blasting for 30 years, but they do make asphalt there. And it's a very, very convenient location to the state highways, to 390, 490, 590. So they're actually bringing stone, in some cases, certain types of stone to that site for asphalt purposes.
And
so
I'd
that's
say
going to go on for a long
The
period of
comprehensive
time.
plan committee will talk about the quarry as well as any property in town. So it's just because it's not part of the Shadow Lake group, we're trying to have them just kind of focus on the property that we own. But the comprehensive plan will talk about all properties in town. So it will be addressed through committee, and obviously it's something we continue to keep an eye on.
But of course, what's important for the Shadow Pines group is to make sure that no development is done that would impede upon what the future access to that lake might be in the future. And I think that there are a lot of things that could be on the table in the long run as to how the town could interface with that lake. And it may even include reorganizing the roads in that area. It's a huge opportunity there, and the town needs to think big. and they need to think big starting now. I mean, it could be 20 years to do it, but we
It'll probably be longer than that, but yeah, good point.
Got a question in the back.
Well, before we do that, Ed had a question before we started.
Well, a couple of questions and comments.
Yeah, where's Linda? There you come.
Here you go, Ed.
Thank you. Ed Linskog, Vice President of Penfield Trails. There's a couple of issues. We are probably going to be doing a trails hike in Shadow Pines as part of a community hike that we do every month. And another area is if we don't mow some of the area, it'll all be woods. So we want to make sure that we know if we want some open area in the, because nature is great at making woods. I mean, they do that all the time. And hopefully we'll be able to get a trail map like we have in our brochure for all the rest of the parks we got in the area. Thank you.
And that's one of the things that the Shadow Pines Committee is talking about. We've talked about, depending on what they decide, if they're going to have a lodge or a shelter, do you want areas mowed around it? Do you want paths mowed? And that's some of the stuff that, we've been talking to the committee about, and they're weighing in on is the recommendations for mowing. And, would there be some, I won't say lawn area, but, more mowed, field space.
Well,
We had a gentleman in the back.
Dick, before we go on, we've got other, actually this young lady over here was had her hand raised too. Yeah.
The existing, the trails that are there now, are they the existing trails from the golf course?
Yes, they are. Yeah.
So there's no new trails. And also, the company you brought in to look at the trees, did they look for disease and things like that?
Yeah. Yep.
Some of the trees were taken down for disease. Some were taken down for sight distance issues. There was areas of pockets of deer, standing by the road. We've had a lot of car accidents in that area. So can't say that every tree was diseased, but there was a multitude of issues. Anytime you have a hedgerow of trees and you take out some, you expose the hedgerow to, if you've ever seen it, anytime they clear a lot, all the ones on the edge kind of fall over as well. So a lot of it's done for safety along that road frontage to make it safe for both pedestrians and for vehicles.
And last question, do you have an inventory of what kinds of trees are in there? There must be some unusual ones that the...
A lot of ash trees, and most of them, as you went along the frontage, Austrian pines. We used to have Austrian pines out here in the back. There's a blight on those right now. It just basically burns the tree up from the bottom up, so the top has a little bit of greenery. A lot over there you would see ivy growing across the trees, so it looks green as you go by at 55, but there's really not a lot of the tree left. It's just kind of the ivy there. So the Austrian pines have had a blight in them. Obviously, everybody knows about emerald ash borers. And then the trees in front of the Clark house, you could see that, the wood rot just inside of them. They look fine as you're standing there, but you open it up and, the trees kind of met its natural life cycle.
That was also true along Clark Road as you were heading along to the north to Atlantic Avenue. A lot of those trees had lived their life and they were starting to fade on us as well. That's why so many were taken out. It kind of opens up the property, though, to give you a better appreciation of how much land is out there. And as I say, we're not going to prevent trees from growing again. We're certainly going to be looking at opportunities to plant where we can to embellish that area. Somebody had a question over here. Yes?
When you talk about opportunities to fund all these plans, does that include a rise in town taxes?
No, I don't think the intent is to raise taxes in any event on this. I think there's so many opportunities that, as Ginny noted, there are people out there more than willing to donate their time and energy and materials to embellish. We've already had several people, as the vote was coming in, that were willing to offer their time and energies to embellish the areas that's going to be developed for open space. So I don't think that we're looking at things such as grants, state park grants, that kind of thing.
You keep talking about this RFP. Are you looking to have the town become a landlord and rent it to somebody who wants a restaurant? Or are you looking to sell it?
No, we're not looking to sell the property. We're looking to lease it probably for a long-term period because there's a lot of work that has to be done, particularly, if you look at the barn, I mean, if somebody were to rent that barn for a period of time for whatever use, they're going to have to put money into it, so they're going to have to be able to get that money back out. So it's not going to be like a 1-year or a 2-year type rent. It could be as much as 10 years or whatever to offset the costs associated with refurbishing the barn. The same is true of the Clark House. If somebody is going to take the Clark House over, say for a restaurant, just because there's restaurant activity in there prior to this, There's a lot of work that has to be done there. They're not going to want to come in for like a 2-year period. They're going to want 5 or 10-year leases. So the intent is not to sell those properties. The intent is to lease them out at this point in time to the most viable operators.
And I say we've done some environmental testing on the buildings. As you can imagine, there is lead paint in the building. There is some lead in the stain with it. We've done evaluation for asbestos, some of the glazing around the windows, some of the stuff on the canopy on the patio. So if somebody does take it over, there's some work to do with it. Any type of restoration, you're going to have to take into account lead paint and work properly with that. So there's not a lot, but we did our due diligence ahead of time to make sure that we knew what we were getting into when we acquired the property.
Thank you. Mark, thank you. Jim.
Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Shadow Pines Perspective.